When a narcissist knows they did something wrong, they don't apologize. They don't come to you and say, "You're right, I messed up, I'm sorry." What they actually do is make you feel like you're the problem. And if that has ever happened to you, if you've ever tried to have a real honest conversation with someone and somehow walked away feeling like the crazy one, this video is going to explain exactly why that happened. Because here's the thing most people don't understand. Guilt doesn't make a narcissist humble. It makes them defensive. It makes them aggressive. It makes them do everything possible to flip the story around so that you're the one who ends up explaining yourself. And once you see how that works, once you really understand the pattern, you stop being confused by it. And that changes everything. So let's start at the beginning. Why does guilt hit a narcissist so differently than it hits everyone else? For most of us, when we do something wrong, we feel bad about it. That feeling of guilt is uncomfortable, sure, but it points us somewhere useful. It tells us something needs to be fixed. Maybe we need to apologize. Maybe we need to change something about how we're behaving. Guilt, for most people, is a signal that actually helps. But for a narcissist, guilt doesn't feel like a signal. It feels like an attack. And that's not an exaggeration. Deep down, someone with a narcissistic pattern has built their whole identity around the idea that they are not the problem. They are never wrong. They are never the one who needs to change. That belief isn't just something they think. It's something they need to survive emotionally. So when guilt shows up, when something they did is clearly wrong and they can feel that, it doesn't just make them uncomfortable. It threatens the whole story they've been telling themselves about who they are. Think about it this way. Most of us can say, "I was wrong about that," and still feel okay about ourselves. We can hold both things at once. I made a mistake and I'm still a good person. But a narcissist can't do that. In their mind, being wrong doesn't mean they made a mistake. It means they are a bad person. It means the whole image they've built falls apart, and they will do absolutely anything to stop that from happening. So instead of sitting with guilt and letting it do what it's supposed to do, they immediately start looking for a way out. And the fastest way out is to make sure the guilt lands somewhere else, somewhere other than them. And that's where things start to get really painful for the person on the other side of it, which is you. The first thing you'll usually notice is that they stop being warm. That easy warmth they had before, the way they made you feel comfortable and understood, it just disappears. And what replaces it is this strange kind of tension. Like everything you say is being watched. Like every word you use is going to be picked apart. And that's actually exactly what's happening. Because when they feel guilty and they can't deal with that guilt honestly, they switch into control mode. They start managing the conversation instead of having it. Every time you try to bring something up, they redirect. Every time you try to name what happened, they find a way to make that the issue instead of what they actually did. You find yourself explaining your tone, defending your feelings, justifying why you're even upset in the first place. And somewhere in the middle of all that, the original problem, the thing they did, just quietly disappears from the conversation. This isn't something they sit down and plan out. It happens almost automatically because they've been doing it their whole lives. Their nervous system knows that if they can keep you on the defensive, they never have to be there themselves. So they keep you busy, keep you explaining, keep you slightly off balance. And as long as you're doing all of that, they're safe. And here's what makes this so hard to deal with in real time. You're trying to have an honest conversation. You're coming into it with genuine feelings and real things that need to be talked about. And they're playing a completely different game. You think you're having a discussion. They're making sure they don't lose. And those two things look very similar from the outside, but feel completely different when you're inside them. You'll notice it in the small things first, the way they sigh when you start talking, The way they look slightly bored or irritated, like you're being dramatic. The way they bring up something you did 3 weeks ago that has nothing to do with the conversation you're trying to have right now. All of that is strategy, even if it doesn't look like it. It's all designed to make you feel like you're too much, like you're the one causing problems by even bringing this up. And eventually, if you push back, if you stay firm and keep trying to get back to the real issue, they shift again, this time into full denial. Not quiet denial, confident denial. They don't say, I'm not sure I remember it that way. They say, that didn't happen. Or, you're completely misremembering this. Or, I never said that. And they say it with so much certainty that for a second, you actually wonder if they might be right. That's the point. That certainty is a tool. When someone denies your experience with total confidence, it creates doubt. And doubt is much easier for them to work with than the truth. Because if you're doubting yourself, you're not focused on holding them accountable anymore. You're too busy trying to figure out what's real. This is where a lot of people start to feel really lost. Because you remember what happened. You know what was said. You were there. But now you're being told by someone who also was there that it didn't happen the way you think. And the more you try to prove it, the more they dig in. The more evidence you bring, the more they dismiss it. And it starts to feel like you're going crazy, even though you're not. You're just dealing with someone who has decided that the truth is less important than their image. And then comes the part that hurts the most, the blame shift. This is when they stop just denying and start accusing. Suddenly, you're the manipulative one. You're the one who always blows things out of proportion. You're the one who never lets anything go. And they don't say this timidly. They say it like they've been holding it in for a long time, like they're actually the ones who have been patient with you. And in that moment, everything flips. You came into this conversation as the person with the genuine concern. And somehow you've ended up as the defendant. What's really happening here is that they're taking all the things they actually did and putting them on you. Everything you said about their behavior, they now say back to you about yours. It's like they took your words and just aimed them in a different direction. And the reason this lands so hard is because you're an honest person. You actually care about whether you're behaving well. So when someone accuses you of something, you take it seriously. You start asking yourself, am I being manipulative? Am I overreacting? Have I been too sensitive about this? And while you're doing all that honest self-reflection, they're not doing any. They're just watching it work. This is the part where a lot of good people lose themselves. Not because they're weak, but because they're too honest for their own good in this situation. They keep giving the benefit of the doubt to someone who has no intention of doing the same for them. But something starts to shift inside you eventually, and it happens quietly. You start noticing the pattern, not just in this conversation, but across all of them. You start seeing that it always goes the same way. You bring something up, they redirect. You push, they deny. You stay firm, they attack. And then somehow you end up apologizing. You end up being the one who smooths things over. You end up being the one who keeps the peace. And every time that happens, they walk away with nothing to change, and you walk away carrying all of it. Once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it. And that moment of clarity, that moment where you stop being confused and start being clear, is actually the most important thing that happens in this whole dynamic. Because your confusion was always their greatest tool. As long as you were questioning yourself, they had room to move. But once you're clear, once you actually know what you experienced and you trust that knowledge, something changes. You stop arguing the same way. You stop trying to convince them because you realize that convincing them was never the point. They know what they did. You're not trying to show them something they missed. You're asking them to admit something they've already decided to hide. And no amount of explaining is going to change that decision. And they feel this shift in you. Even if they don't say anything about it, even if they keep acting the same way on the surface, They feel that you're not chasing them the same way anymore, that your need for their validation has changed. And that unsettles them because the whole system they built depends on you needing something from them. It depends on you being just uncertain enough to keep trying. When that uncertainty goes away, the leverage goes with it. So they do what they always do when they feel something slipping. They reach for a stronger version of the same tools. More silence, longer silences, the kind that are so pointed and deliberate that you feel them physically. They go cold in a way that feels designed to make you uncomfortable enough to come back and fix things, to soften, to give a little ground, to be the bigger person again, because you've been the bigger person before and they know you might do it again. Or the silence breaks and something sharp comes out instead. Not necessarily screaming, sometimes it's just this cold, cutting version of them you don't usually see. The kind of anger that isn't about processing something, it's about shutting something down. It comes out at exactly the moment when you're close to getting to the truth. And suddenly the conversation isn't about what they did anymore, it's about how they're feeling right now, about how unfair you're being, about how much you hurt them by pushing this. And if that doesn't work, if you hold your ground and don't get pulled into the chaos, they become the victim. And this is the most disorienting version of it, because suddenly the person who caused the harm is the one who looks wounded. They talk about how hard this has been for them, how they feel attacked, how they've been trying so hard and it's never enough. And they do it with real emotion. Real tears sometimes. And you're left feeling like maybe you pushed too hard. Maybe you asked for too much. Maybe you were too harsh with someone who clearly is hurting. But what just happened is that accountability got replaced with theater. Your real and valid concern got buried under their performance of being hurt. And the moment you soften, the moment you reach over and say, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you feel that way," the dynamic resets. And they've won that round without ever having to address a single thing that mattered. When you understand this, really understand it, something important happens. You stop taking those emotional performances at face value. Not because you become cold or heartless, but because you've seen the timing of them too many times now. You've noticed that the tears always seem to arrive right when accountability does. You've noticed that the pain always seems to peak right when you're about to say something that matters. And you start to understand that emotions can be genuine and still be used strategically. Both things can be true. And there's something else that happens during all of this that doesn't get talked about enough. They start rewriting the past, not in a subtle way, in a complete, confident, detailed way. Things that happened very clearly suddenly have a completely different story attached to them. Things you both lived through together get retold in a version where they look fine and you look unreasonable. And they tell that version with such consistency that after a while it starts to take hold. Even in your own mind sometimes. You start questioning your own memories, wondering if your version of events is actually accurate, wondering if you've been telling yourself a story. This is not an accident. This is one of the most effective things they do. Because if they can make you uncertain about the past, they can make you uncertain about everything. And an uncertain person is a much easier person to manage than a clear one. But here is the thing that always remains true. You were there. You felt it in your body at the time. You remember how you felt in those moments. The confusion, the hurt, the sense that something wasn't right. That felt experience doesn't lie. And no amount of confident retelling from someone else erases what actually happened inside you. Your body kept the score, even when your mind starts to wobble under pressure. And the more you come back to that, the more you trust what you actually lived through, the less their rewritten version can touch you. You stop needing them to agree with your memory for it to be real. You stop trying to convince them of something that you already know. And that's a massive shift, because so much of the exhaustion in this kind of relationship comes from constantly trying to get the other person to see what's right in front of them. When you stop needing that, you get a huge amount of energy back. And here's what they do with your growing steadiness. They test it. They provoke. They poke at the edges of it to see if it's real. They say something designed to get a reaction. They bring up something they know bothers you. They create a small crisis right at the moment when things were starting to feel calm. Because calm, real calm, means you're not focused on them anymore. And they need your focus. They need your emotional attention. Even negative attention is better for them than being ignored. So when they test you and you don't react the way you used to, when you respond quietly instead of urgently, or when you don't respond at all, they feel it. And they either escalate or they go very still. Both of those reactions are telling, because what you're seeing is someone who has lost the tool they relied on most. Your reaction was the thing that kept them powerful in this dynamic. And without it, they don't quite know what to do. This is the moment most people don't expect, because you'd think that someone facing that loss of power would finally get honest, would finally drop the act, would finally just talk to you like a real person. But that's not what usually happens. What usually happens is that they double down. They become more defended, not less. More controlled in how they present themselves. More careful about what they let you see. Because the more threatened they feel, the more important it becomes to protect the image. Softening would mean letting you in. And letting you in right now, when you can see them clearly, feels too dangerous. So they get more polished, more careful. They start performing the version of themselves that works best in public. And if you try to talk to anyone else about what's going on, you find that everyone else sees this perfectly reasonable together person. And you're left feeling like you must be the problem. Because how can you be struggling with someone that everyone else seems to have no issue with at all? This is one of the lonelier parts of this experience. The gap between who they are with you and who they are with everyone else. And that gap is not random. You see the version of them you see because you've gotten close enough to ask real questions. Everyone else is still getting the performance. And the reason that hurts is because somewhere you remember when you were getting the performance too, when everything felt easy and warm and good. And part of you keeps waiting for that version to come back. But here's what you need to understand. That version wasn't a lie exactly, but it wasn't the full truth either. It was the version they show when they feel safe and in control and admired. What you're seeing now is what was always underneath. Not because they've changed, but because the situation changed. Because you started asking for more than they were willing to give. Because you stopped accepting less than you deserved. And that shift in you is what revealed who they actually are. And once you really land on that, once you stop wondering what you did wrong to make them change, and start understanding that their change was always a response to your clarity, something in you settles. You stop trying to go back. You stop trying to recreate a dynamic that only worked because you were asking for so little. You start to understand that what you lost wasn't a great relationship. It was a comfortable illusion. And those are very different things. The pain is still real. The grief is still real. You can know something wasn't good for you and still miss it. You can understand a pattern clearly and still feel the ache of it. That's not weakness. That's just being human. But understanding the pattern is what stops you from going back into it, because now you know what you'd be walking back into. Not the warm version, the defended version, the version that was always going to eventually look like this. And the thing they never really account for is what happens when you finally stop needing them to admit what they did. Because so much of this dynamic runs on your need for their acknowledgement, your need for them to say, yes, I did that and I'm sorry. And that need is completely understandable. Of course you want that. Of course you deserve that. But waiting for it is what keeps you stuck, because they have made a decision, consciously or not, that they will not give you that. Not because they can't see it, but because seeing it and admitting it would cost them something they're not willing to pay. The moment you stop waiting, the moment you accept that the acknowledgement you need is not coming from them and start giving it to yourself, the whole thing loses its grip on you. You stop needing them to confirm your reality. You start trusting it yourself. And that trust, quiet and steady and entirely yours, is something they cannot touch. They can rewrite history, but they can't change what you lived. They can deny your experience, but they can't make it not have happened. They can perform innocence, but they cannot undo what you know. And what you know, held quietly and confidently inside you, is more than enough to move forward with. Because here is what this whole thing was really about underneath all of it. It was never really about the specific argument. It was never about who was right about what was said on a Tuesday 3 months ago. It was about whether you would trust yourself or whether you would outsource that trust to someone who had every reason to distort it. And the fact that you're here, still asking questions, still trying to understand, still refusing to just accept a version of events that never felt right to you, that says everything about who you are. You didn't stay confused because you're weak. You stayed because you're honest, because you actually care about getting things right, because you keep giving people the benefit of the doubt even when they stopped deserving it. And that's not a character flaw. It's a beautiful thing about you that got exploited. And the answer isn't to become someone who stops caring. The answer is to get much clearer about who has actually earned that care. The peace you're looking for doesn't come from them finally admitting it. It comes from you finally not needing them to. It comes from trusting your own experience so completely that their version of it just doesn't have anywhere to land. It comes from standing in what you know without apology, without needing backup, without waiting for permission from the person who hurt you to feel okay about what you went through. That's not something they can give you. And the good news is, it was never theirs to give. It was always yours. And the moment you take it back and stop handing it to someone who keeps dropping it, everything starts to feel different. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just steadily, quietly, surely, more like yourself again. And that's really what all of this was pointing toward the whole time. Not just understanding them better, understanding yourself better, trusting yourself more, coming back to the version of you that existed before all the second guessing, the version that knew what it felt, trusted what it saw, and didn't need anyone else to sign off on that. That version of you never went anywhere. It just got a little quiet under the weight of all the confusion. And now that the confusion is lifting, now that you can see the pattern for what it is, that version gets to come back. And once it does, no one who depended on your doubt will be able to reach you there.